Hello, podheads, and welcome back to another episode of Over My Dead Pod. I'm your host for today, Holly Lamoureux.
This is Kate Carter.
And I'm Carly Colwell.
I'm in a new recording studio today. I'm also holding my mic. I'd like to make that announcement.
She looks very professional.
I really like it. I think it's going to change a lot of things about me. So let's just jump right in. In a town where secrets are hard to keep, somehow no one seemed to know anything, or at least no one was willing to talk. Something happened on a dark stretch of road in Courtland, Mississippi that would leave investigators searching for answers for years. December 2014. The town of Courtland, Mississippi had a population of only a few hundred people. It was the kind of place where everybody recognizes your truck when you drive and news travels fast. Quiet roads, small neighborhoods, everyone knows everyone, which is exactly why what happened there felt so impossible. 19-year-old Jessica Chambers grew up surrounded by family and lifelong friends. Her parents, Ben and Lisa Chambers, had divorced when she was younger, but they stay close and co-parent peacefully. In fact, they only live a few houses apart on the same street. So this makes it really easy for Jessica to just walk back and forth between houses whenever she feels like it. And despite the divorce, her family remained incredibly tight-knit. By all accounts, Jessica was outgoing, social, and well-known around town. In a community as small as Courtland, nearly everyone knew who she was and everyone liked her. She was popular in school, she was the cheerleader, and she had dreams of graduating high school and going on to nursing school. But on a cold December night in 2014, 8:00 p.m., two men driving along Heron Road noticed something glowing in the distance. At first, it was just a light flickering through the darkness. But as they got closer, they realized an entire vehicle was burning on the side of the road. Heron Road was isolated and barely traveled, especially at night. There were no nearby houses, no traffic, and no other cars in sight. Just flames tearing through a parked vehicle in the middle of darkness. The men immediately called 911. Within minutes, volunteer firefighters from the small Courtland Fire Department arrived at the scene. Their first priority was containing the blaze before it spread into the surrounding woods. But as they approached the vehicle, something about the scene felt wrong, almost immediately. The car was fully engulfed, but there had been no reports of a crash, no shattered debris scattered across the road, no signs another vehicle had been involved, and even stranger, no one appeared to be inside the car. Firefighters searched the area in confusion. In a situation like this, you'd expect to find at least the driver, someone injured, someone yelling for help, something, but the road was completely silent. As firefighters worked to get the flames under control, someone suddenly noticed some movement coming from the darkness beside the road. At first, they couldn't even see what they were looking at. And then they realized that it was a young woman who stumbled out from the wooded area near the burning car. She was barely clothed, wearing only underwear, and the extent of her injuries was almost unimaginable. Her skin had been severely burned over most of her body, her hair singed away, and every movement that she took looked painful. She was described as appearing to be in complete shock, wandering forward in a daze with her arms stretched slightly out in front of her. This is traumatizing for firefighters to actually see this. I left out a lot of the reporting of just how terrible her burns were and how horrible she looked. Her skin was basically melted off her body and she's still walking. There was reports from the firefighters afterwards. This was on an investigation. I think it was Investigation Discovery that I first saw this, and it was they were so emotional just from still seeing this. And I left a lot of it out because it was really actually really, really sad. Yeah, just a crazy situation. Some reports claim that she was actually still on fire when she emerged, and others said the flames had already gone out, but the burns were nevertheless catastrophic. Either way, the scene horrified everyone there. Jessica struggled towards the first responders, appearing to whisper for help. Despite the pain that she had to be in, she was still alive. The firefighters rushed to her side, trying to keep her conscious while emergency crews prepared to transport her to the hospital. But even in those first moments, they could tell that this was far more than a car accident. Something terrible had happened to her on that road. First responders later said that she repeatedly cried out for help, struggling to get words out through her pain. Her voice was weak and strained, almost impossible to understand. Then, at some point during the chaos, they asked her name. She whispered quietly something that sounded like Jessica Chambers. And immediately, several of the responders realized who they were dealing with. Like I said, tiny town, and some of the firefighters and EMTs either knew Jessica personally or knew of her family. But the horrifying part was that they had not recognized her at first because of the severity of her burns. The young woman standing in front of them, barely alive and catastrophically injured, was 19-year-old Jessica Chambers. First responders are doing everything that they can to keep her alive and talking as they wait to get her to the hospital. They ask, "Who did this to you?" According to multiple first responders at the scene, Jessica repeatedly said that someone had set her on fire. They kept asking the same question over and over, "Who did this to you?" And that is when one of the most debated moments of the entire case happens. Several people present believe that Jessica spoke a man's first name. Some people heard Eric, but others heard Derek. So Eric or Derek. But her mouth, lips, and tongue had been severely burned, making it incredibly difficult for her to clearly speak. Even those standing close to her struggled to understand what she was saying. Later, this would become a massive point of controversy during the investigation and the trials. Some people were convinced that she clearly identified a suspect, while others argued her injuries made the name impossible to interpret with certainty. At one point, first responders reportedly tried to have Jessica write down the name instead, but her burns were so severe that she could barely move her hands or arms, much less hold a pen. By then, Jessica was beginning to lose consciousness. And they're doing all of this while they're waiting for the medical helicopter, by the way, and it arrives, and first responders continued fighting to save her life on the side of Heron Road. In the absolute middle of this catastrophe, strangely, a man walks up to the scene, and this man is apparently just like standing there gawking, like looking at Jessica, looking at the car, and then he just walks off, like, question mark. It's extra weird because, like I said, this is a rural, dark, and mostly empty road, and the report didn't say the guy was driving a car. The police report just mentions that he walks up to the scene.
Red flag.
It could be somebody that's happens to be walking and he's like, okay, I'm gonna try to stop and help, or you see a bad accident and you can't look away, but I don't know, it seems a bit strange, and the police report just mentions him. So I assume he didn't just pull off the side of the road and offer to help. He never says anything to any of the officers offering help. I don't know, big question mark on that one. But the first responders were so focused on saving Jessica that probably everyone thought he was just a curious bystander or didn't even know who he was. Despite the severity of her injuries, Jessica survived long enough to be airlifted to a hospital in Memphis, Tennessee, where doctors worked desperately to save her. Investigators would later learn just how horrific her injuries truly were. Jessica had suffered extensive thermal burns over most of her body, and authorities determined that some type of accelerant or flammable liquid had been used during the attack. According to reports, the substance had been found not only on her body, but also inside of her nose and throat, indicating that she had inhaled or swallowed the accelerant while she was still alive. Meanwhile, her family rushes to the hospital to be with her. But by the early morning hours of Sunday, December 7th, 2017, Jessica succumbed to her injuries and died. And she was able to see her mom and see her family before she passed away. What had set the car on fire on a quiet road in rural Mississippi was now officially a homicide investigation. As Jessica's family tried to process the shock of losing her, investigators immediately began working to reconstruct the final hours of her life. Jessica's mother, Lisa Chambers, sat down with detectives to help piece together where her daughter had been the day before the attack. Lisa told investigators that on Saturday evening, sometime around 5 o'clock or 5:30 p.m., Jessica received a phone call, or maybe it was a text. And shortly after, she got up and she told her mom that she was heading out to get something to eat and clean out her car. And then she leaves the house. At that time, nothing seemed unusual. But as the evening went on, Lisa Chambers started becoming uneasy. Hours had passed since Jessica left the house, and she had still not returned home. At first, Lisa simply texted her to check in, asking where she had gone and whether she had made it to wash her car. But Jessica never responds. So Lisa calls her. And Jessica didn't answer right away, but shortly before 7 p.m., she finally called her mother back. The conversation itself seemed ordinary on the surface. Jessica told Lisa that she would be home soon and even mentioned that she was finally going to clean her room, something that her mom had apparently been asking her to do for quite a while. But something about the call bothered Lisa almost immediately. And that was because the line was unusually quiet. There's no music playing in the background, no road noise, no voices, nothing. According to Lisa, that silence felt strange because it was unlike Jessica. Normally, there's like always something going on around her. Obviously, it's not something you're going to raise huge red flags over. You're just like, oh, mental note, like that's a little strange. The call lasted just over a minute, and then a little after 8 p.m., someone would call 911 to report the vehicle fully engulfed in flames on Heron Road. So we know that this is a really short time gap between the call and the 911 call of the car on fire. Investigators quickly realized that they were dealing with far more questions than answers. There was a critical gap in Jessica's timeline that evening. Detectives needed to know who had contacted Jessica before she left home, where she went afterwards, and who she had been with in the hours leading up to the attack. So we know she got that phone call, so they were like, we got to figure out who called her. But the investigation faced major challenges almost immediately. Jessica's car had been severely damaged by the fire, meaning any potential evidence may have been destroyed or contaminated. Detectives began collecting whatever they could from the vehicle while simultaneously pulling phone records, interviewing witnesses, and trying to retrace Jessica's movements that day. It quickly became clear that local authorities would need outside assistance. Within days, a larger task force had formed, and it involved the Panola County Sheriff's Office, the Mississippi Bureau of Investigations, the FBI, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, and the U.S. Attorney's Office. So it's an all-hands-on-deck situation. Then another strange piece of evidence would surface. On the same day that Jessica died, a man walking along a road roughly an eighth of a mile from the scene discovered car keys laying on the ground. Investigators immediately found that detail suspicious. If Jessica's vehicle had been set on fire where it was found, why were the car keys so far away from the car? Whoever set the car on fire is probably ditching these keys, like, down the road. The keys were sent off for DNA testing while investigators continued processing other evidence from the scene. Jessica's phone had been recovered. It was reportedly found underneath the driver's side of the vehicle, so probably like under the seat. Investigators recovered what little evidence they could from the burn scene. Along the items collected were pieces of heavily damaged clothing and other charred materials found near or inside of the vehicle. Much of it was difficult to even identify what it was because of the extent of the fire, but everything was sent off for forensic testing in hopes that DNA evidence might survive. At the same time, detectives obtained a search warrant for Jessica's cell phone records. However, reports indicate that the warrant only covered 24 hours leading up to her death. I have no idea why. I've never heard of that. I don't know if it was just like an emergency, the judge just gave them that, or if it's like a cell phone issue. It's 2014. It's not like it's the early age of cell phones.
I feel like that has to be an emergency request where they only granted 24 hours.
Wait, is it just her records or like surrounding area?
It's just her cell phone.
I understand like when they're doing like a broad canvas and they're like looking at everyone's cell phone records in town, they have to keep it pretty narrow and specific. But
yeah, no, this is just her cell phone records. My first thought is that it's just an emergency order until they let them have the last 24 hours until they can get more evidence to go get a broader warrant for like all of her cell phone records. But I don't know. Guys, the law is really stupid sometimes. That phone data immediately becomes important. Investigators learned that earlier that Saturday morning, Jessica had been communicating with a friend named Keisha. According to Keisha, she picked Jessica up around 10:30 a.m. and another man was reportedly with them. And his name is, wait for it, Quinton Tellis. So not close to Derek or Eric, unfortunately. At that time, Tellis reportedly had prior run-ins with law enforcement involving things like burglary and drug-related issues, but he wasn't known to be a violent offender. Apparently, the three of them drove around for an hour, and then they dropped Quinton off at his home, which was across the street from a convenience store. This convenience store was like a known place where young people hang out. Investigators got Quinton's phone records and the security camera footage from that store, and everything checks out. The cameras showed that the girls dropped him off and also captured Jessica going to that store a couple times that day. Again, this is a local hangout. It's like a meetup place, a go in and grab snacks kind of place, hang out, sit. We know that Jessica went home around 12:30 that afternoon. She took a nap in her living room. She gets woken up by the call or the text that her mother told us about. And then around 5:45 to 5:15 is when she leaves, says she's going to go get something to eat and clean her car out. That's when she's captured at the camera from the gas station at 5:24 p.m. When investigators reviewed the gas station surveillance footage, they paid close attention to every movement Jessica Chambers made that evening. The video shows Jessica pulling up to the pumps and starting to walk towards the store. But before she reaches the entrance, something appears to catch her attention off camera. Of course, it's always off camera. Jessica suddenly turns and looks towards the side of a parking lot, almost as if she recognizes someone. The footage is grainy, so it's difficult to tell exactly what happens, but people who later viewed it believe that she either lifted her hand to wave or acknowledged someone outside of the camera's view. Then she walks away from the store entrance and disappears off camera for several minutes. So she's like walking towards the entrance. She sees someone, she like waves or does some kind of like motion, and then she diverts her path of going in the store and goes and talks to that individual, we think. Eventually, Jessica returns from the same direction and heads inside the gas station to pay for her fuel. Interior surveillance footage shows her behaving normally while inside, and she's alone. A few other people can be seen in the store, but there doesn't appear to be any significant interaction between them and Jessica. After paying, she walks back out to her car alone, and she drives away. At first glance, it looked completely ordinary, but investigators became increasingly interested in those missing few minutes that Jessica spent off camera, and who exactly may have gotten her attention that night. No other camera would pick up who she was talking to. Using cell phone towers, investigators learned that she went to a nearby town after this called Batesville, and she got there around 6:00 p.m., then went back to Courtland around 6:30. To this day, no one knows why she went to Batesville. I assume like this is just a small town and this is another small town. Like, it's not like she's going to like traveling a long ways to like a big city. Like, this is small town within small town. You probably don't even know you pass into the small town. She talks on the phone to her mom, and this is the call where her mom said that the call was strangely quiet. Then, as we know, next time we would hear from her, it would be on Road Heron. Investigators need to find who Jessica was talking to at the gas station that night. This should be easy, small town, you would think. Of course, we know that it's never is. Investigators ask anyone that saw Jessica to come forward and help them fill that gap, but no one does, making it even more suspicious. The person that Jessica was talking to off camera never comes forward. Investigators then decide that they're going to track down every Eric and Derek in Panola County and surrounding counties. So they talk to over 100 Erics and Dereks and interview them. And they find 2 Erics who are directly connected to Jessica through her Facebook page. But they are able to rule them both out, I believe, by looking at both of their cell phone records. Speaking of cell phone records, police were able to get more of Jessica's phone records and were able to see all of her text messages. They saw a text that came in minutes before that 911 call, and it was from Quinton Tellis, the guy that Jessica and her friend Keisha were with. And it said that he couldn't hang out tonight because he had a friend coming over and he wished her sweet dreams. So police had already talked to Quinton, and he had neglected to tell police that he had plans to hang out with Jessica later that night, the night she died. So it seems a little odd that this wouldn't be something he felt like mentioning. So investigators bring him back in and question him some more. It seems like there's more of a relationship between the two than they first thought. They ask him what his relationship really was to Jessica, and he reveals that there might have been something. But Quinton said that night the girls dropped him off, he hung out with them, and then the rest of the day, and then that night he went to his sister's house and borrowed her car to drive to Batesville. So they're both in Batesville at around the same time. According to Tellis, he had gone to a Fred's store to purchase a Green Dot prepaid debit card, and he reportedly told investigators the card was meant for his girlfriend who lived in Monroe, Louisiana, so that she could afford transportation to come see him. Does your girlfriend know you're telling other girls to have sweet dreams, Quinton?
The tea.
Those types of cards can be difficult to trace, as we know, compared to traditional bank transactions. And in a case already filled with suspicious and unanswered questions and conflicting statements, it seems suspicious. After buying this prepaid card, he returned a truck to his sister and later went back to the local convenience store before eventually heading home to wait for his girlfriend to arrive from Louisiana. That was the version of events that he gave investigators. But detectives were focused less on the story itself and more on whether the timeline actually matched the evidence. Surveillance footage reportedly placed Tellis at the Fred store around 8:15 p.m., roughly 15 minutes after the burning car on Heron Road had been reported to 911. Investigators immediately began analyzing whether the timeline was realistic and whether it would have been possible for Tellis to travel between the locations within that window of time. Tellis was also on camera footage at both Fred's and another nearby convenience store, which seemed to support portions of the story that he had given them about where he was that night. To me, it means nothing. To me, it means you're just establishing an alibi, and maybe you need to, do some things in between this time. You set the car on fire. If you can still make it to the convenience store, then you're still a suspect in my mind. Still, detectives continue digging. At some point during the investigation, authorities searched Tellis' property. During that search, they reportedly found a shed containing a dirt bike along with containers of gasoline. Dirt bikes obviously require fuel, and simply having gasoline on your property is not evidence of a crime. But because Jessica's death involved fire and an accelerant, investigators just noted this. We don't have evidence of him going and getting gas from any store, so they're thinking okay, mental note, this is something he has readily available at his house. I don't keep gas cans at my house, but he does, so there's that. Detectives also questioned Tellis about the confusing statement that Jessica made before she died, specifically the possibility that she could have said the name Eric or Derek. And they're asking him, what does he think about this? What's his opinion? Tellis offers an explanation. He mentions that there is a man named Derek Holmes and claimed that Jessica had previously had problems with him. Investigators took a serious look at Derek Holmes after his name repeatedly had surfaced during early interviews. I assume this was when they were looking at Erics and Derricks in town. They've already come in contact with this guy. People who knew Jessica Chambers described Holmes as someone who had been overly persistent with her and allegedly had made her uncomfortable. Detectives also discover Holmes had previously been convicted in a case involving exploitation of a minor and was listed as a registered sex offender in Courtland. So, given the circumstances, investigators immediately considered him a potential suspect or a potential lead in the slightest. When detectives interviewed Holmes, they asked him to account for his whereabouts on the night of Saturday, December 6, 2014. Holmes told them that he had remained at home the entire evening helping care for his mother, who reportedly had suffered from diabetic-related medical issues. Guys, he says that he's rubbing his mom's feet that night, by the way.
That's a great alibi. Almost so ridiculous that you have to believe it.
Because why would you offer that information if it was not true? So investigators begin to verify his story, and family members supported Holmes' account. And according to reports, other individuals at the home also stated that he never left that night. But if we listen to just family members' alibis, we might not ever get anywhere. Detectives additionally reviewed cell phone data and other available evidence to see whether Holmes and Jessica could have been placed together around the time of the murder. After tons of investigation, ultimately investigators just could not find any evidence connecting Holmes to Jessica's movements that evening or could place him near the scene of the crime. So he was rubbing his mom's feet. Verified. Full stop. So despite initially drawing attention because of his background and Jessica's allegedly dying statements, Holmes was eventually moved lower on the list of potential suspects as the investigation continued in other directions. Investigators obviously have in their mind that they can't stay too focused on Eric or Derek because they really can't be sure that that's what she said. As the investigation continued, the autopsy results provided investigators with a clearer picture of the brutality of what happened to Jessica Chambers. The medical examiner determined Jessica died from several thermal injuries along with smoke and soot inhalation, confirming that she had been alive after the fire began. Investigators also learned something critical from the burn patterns on her body. According to reports, the burn showed what experts determined as a splash pattern, suggesting that accelerant had been poured directly onto Jessica before she was ignited. Evidence indicated that she had likely been inside or at least very near her vehicle when the attack occurred. Meanwhile, forensic testing on the charred clothing removed from the scene helped investigators identify the accelerant used in the attack, and the substance was determined to be gasoline. One detail investigators never fully clarified publicly was whether Jessica Chambers' clothing had burned away in the fire or whether she had been undressed before the attack. When first responders found Jessica, we know that she was only wearing her underwear, a fact that immediately raised questions about what may have happened in the moments leading to the fire. Reports also indicate that no sexual assault kit of any kind was ultimately performed during the autopsy. Yeah, very unfortunate. Authorities never publicly explain in detail why that decision was made, and over the years, it has become another point of speculation and frustration, obviously. As investigators processed the evidence, a working theory about the crime began to form. Law enforcement reportedly believed the attack was personal rather than random. The brutality of the murder, the isolated location, and the small town nature of Courtland all pointed investigators towards the idea that Jessica knew the person responsible. Detectives also reportedly believed that the killer may have acted alone or possibly with one other person. And in a town as small as Courtland, rumors spread quickly. According to another statement later referenced by Jessica's family, there were whispers in town that someone had been inside the car with Jessica shortly before the attack. So I don't know if this is like people saying, I saw Jessica with someone else in the car, is what I'm imagining. I don't know, but that's what it seems like people are starting to say. Although the autopsy provided investigators with important information about Jessica Chambers' death, it did not give them the clear forensic breakthrough that they desperately needed. But detectives were still waiting on DNA results from evidence collected at the scene, including Jessica's car keys that had been found the short distance away from the burned vehicle. When those results finally came back, investigators discovered multiple DNA profiles on the keys. Most of the DNA belonged to the female profile, which was believed to be Jessica, as expected, but forensic analysis also identified male DNA mixed in with it, including more than one male profile. The problem was that investigators could not immediately determine who the DNA belonged to. In a small town where Jessica knew many people and frequently interacted with friends and acquaintances, the presence of additional DNA alone was not enough to conclusively identify a killer. Detectives would now have to figure out whether those profiles were connected to the murder or simply the result of everyday contact before Jessica's death. The DNA evidence created another frustrating obstacle for investigators. According to the reports, the male DNA recovered from the keys was extremely limited in quantity. Detectives could potentially use it to exclude a certain individual, but the samples were not strong enough to provide the kind of definitive identification investigators typically hope for in a homicide case. So, in other words, the forensic evidence alone was probably not going to solve this murder. So investigators were forced to rely heavily on traditional police work, interviewing people, revisiting timelines, checking alibis, and listening carefully to the rumors spreading throughout Courtland. In a town that small, rumors spread fast. As detectives worked the case, they began hearing claims that contradicted what Jessica's family initially believed about her personal life. While her family reportedly said Jessica didn't have a serious boyfriend at the time, people around town started suggesting that she may have been seeing someone privately or spending time with people her family did not fully know about. One name investigators reportedly heard repeatedly while working through these local rumors was someone named Travis Stanford. According to people familiar with Jessica's personal life, Stanford and Jessica were allegedly involved in some kind of relationship around the time of her death. Reports suggested that the relationship could have been volatile at times and that Stanford had a reputation of being jealous and controlling. At the time Jessica was murdered, Stanford was already incarcerated on burglary charges, so investigators knew that he could not have physically carried out the attack himself. Still, detectives could not immediately dismiss the possibility that he somehow could be connected indirectly. Investigators reportedly heard claims that Stanford had ties to local gangs, though details about those alleged affiliations were never clarified publicly. Because of that, authorities interviewed Stanford. According to investigators, Travis Stanford appeared genuinely emotional when he heard about Jessica's death and the horrific way that she had been killed. After speaking with him and reviewing the circumstances, detectives reportedly moved away from considering him a primary suspect. Even so, rumors surrounding Jessica's personal life continued spreading throughout the community. Her family strongly pushed back against any claims being made after her death. They acknowledged that Jessica had struggled at times and had recently spent time in a rehabilitation program focused on helping her recover from substance abuse issues. But they rejected suggestions that she was deeply involved with gangs or any kind of major criminal activity. At the same time, some of Jessica's friends gave investigators a very different picture of her life in the months leading up to her murder. According to reporting on the case, Jessica's friend Keisha claimed that Jessica regularly smoked marijuana and had been involved in selling small amounts locally. However, many of those claims were difficult to verify independently, and over time, the line between confirmed facts and small-town rumor became increasingly blurred. Jessica's family later expressed frustration that speculation about her personal life seemed to spiral after her death, sometimes overshadowing the reality that she was the victim of a brutal homicide. The news of Jessica Chambers' murder spread, and the internet quickly became flooded with speculation. This was 2014. We have Facebook groups, comment sections, online forums, and they are exploding with people trying to solve the case themselves. In a small town already overwhelmed by rumors, social media only amplified everything. At one point, even the hacktivist group Anonymous reportedly became interested in the case. According to media reports, individuals connected to Anonymous began digging through social media accounts and online activity tied to people connected to Jessica. Various theories started circulating online, including claims that Jessica may have been targeted because of domestic violence, gang activity, or conflicts involving people she was associated with. But investigators repeatedly stated that they could not substantiate those theories with actual evidence. One rumor that gained online traction centered around alleged gang activity in the area. Although Courtland was a small town, investigators acknowledged that there were local gang affiliations in this region. An internet sleuth became heavily focused on a man named Ali Al-Shalom after footage surveillance from the convenience store was released publicly. Because Ali reportedly knew Jessica and was connected to the store where she was last seen on camera, people online began accusing him of involvement in her death without evidence. Rumors spread rapidly across social media, with some users even alleging gang connections and drug activity tied to this convenience store. According to interviews given later, Ali said that he had voluntarily handed surveillance footage over to investigators because he had hoped that it would solve Jessica's murder. Instead, he reportedly began receiving online threats and backlash from people convinced he was involved. Law enforcement eventually publicly stated that Ali was not considered a suspect. At the same time, another theory started circulating throughout the community, and that was that Jessica may have been perceived as a public informant. Not that she actually is, but that people may have thought that she was. Part of that speculation came from the fact that Jessica's father worked as a mechanic for the Panola County Sheriff Department. I don't know how that gets you to that point, but okay. Some people in town allegedly became suspicious of Jessica because she was associating with individuals tied to drugs or gangs while also having a family connection to law enforcement. And people are just speculating here, really. But according to reporting on the case, Jessica had even reported to her mother weeks before her death that some people believed that she was a snitch, though the exact content of that statement was never fully established publicly. So as investigators sorted through all these rumors, one thing became increasingly difficult: separating credible information from fear, gossip, and online speculation. As weeks turned into months, investigators found themselves in a frustrating position. Despite the massive attention surrounding Jessica's murder, detectives still lacked the kind of evidence needed to clearly identify who was responsible for her murder. Rumors continued circulating through Courtland online, but very little concrete information surfaced publicly. Then, in fall of 2015, nearly a year after Jessica's death, investigators received additional cell phone data that renewed momentum in this case. Detectives began taking a much deeper look at Jessica's digital activity and communications from December 6, 2014. Their goal was to narrow down one of the biggest unanswered questions in this investigation: who Jessica had been with during the critical hours leading up to the attack on Heron Road. By analyzing phone records, call activity, and location data, investigators hoped they could determine whether Jessica had been alone that evening. Investigators finally completed a deeper analysis of the cell phone data, and the information did not introduce an entirely new suspect. Instead, it redirected attention back towards someone detectives had already interviewed early in this investigation, and that is Quinton Tellis. According to the records investigators reviewed, Jessica and Tellis had been communicating throughout the day on December 6, 2014. More importantly, the data suggested Tellis may have been in contact with and possibly near Jessica Chambers during the same time frame investigators believe that the attack occurred. That immediately raised questions because it did not fully align with the timeline that Tellis had originally given detectives. He's already changed his story once. Tellis had reportedly emphasized that he had mainly spent time with Jessica earlier in the day, not during the critical evening hours surrounding the murder. By this point, investigators were no longer just reviewing basic call logs or text messages. Reports suggested detectives were taking a much closer, broader cell phone record sweep and timeline analysis in an attempt to reconstruct Jessica's movements minute by minute. And nearly a year into the investigation, authorities finally felt they might be uncovering inconsistencies significant enough to revisit Tellis more aggressively. So in November 2015, detectives traveled to Louisiana to question Tellis again. Because by then, Tellis was no longer living in Mississippi, he was being held in a jail in Monroe, Louisiana, on unrelated debit card theft charges. During the interview, investigators confronted Tellis directly with the cell phone evidence that they had gathered. They told him the data appeared to place him in contact with and potentially near Jessica Chambers later in the day on December 6th, later than he had originally admitted. And this time, again, Tellis changes his story. According to investigators, Tellis claimed that he was actually traveling to Batesville with a friend known as Big Mike, and they met up with Jessica there to provide her with marijuana. However, he continued insisting that he did not see her later that night around the time of the murder. Detectives now have a major problem. The timeline keeps shifting. Cell phone data is not always precise enough to place two people side by side with certainty, especially in these rural areas where cell phone towers can cover wide ranges. So investigators needed to determine whether Tellis's updated explanation could actually be verified. So they bring in this Big Mike for questioning. I don't know his real name, guys. It's just Big Mike this whole time. But according to reports, Big Mike completely contradicted Tellis's account. I knew that he was a truth teller. Big Mike tells the truth. I don't know. He told investigators that he was not with Tellis that day and he had not traveled to Batesville with him at all. Detectives also reportedly confirmed an alibi placing Big Mike in Nashville at that same time, supported by cell phone records, and another witness who said that they had spent the day together watching a football game. So Big Mike's in the clear. And he says that Tellis is not telling the truth. So I think Tellis is just trying to be like, oh no, like I was with her, but also Big Mike was too. We sold her marijuana. And Big Mike's like, no. Good try, Quinton. With that information, investigators returned to Louisiana again in January 2016 to re-interview Tellis. And once again, his version of events changes. This time, he admitted that he had in fact been with Jessica later that evening on December 6th, after previously minimizing how much time that they spent together that day. According to investigators, Tellis now claimed he rode with Jessica to Batesville sometime after 5:30 p.m. So now he's riding with her, and that the two had later gone back to his house briefly before separating. Detectives pressed him about another key detail: surveillance footage showing him at a dollar store in Batesville around 8:30 p.m., after Jessica had already been attacked on Heron Road. Tellis explained that he had gone there to purchase this card for his girlfriend. This is that. But investigators were becoming increasingly suspicious of his timeline, evolving with each interview. Then, according to reports, Tellis volunteered another piece of information that investigators had not directly asked him about. He allegedly admitted that he and Jessica had previously had a sexual relationship, though he insisted that it happened about a week before the murders and not the night she died. Investigators reportedly found a detail noteworthy for several reasons when Tellis described encounters taking place inside Jessica's vehicle, including them repositioning the seat further back. And when investigators examined Jessica's burned car, they noticed that one of the seats had been, in fact, reclined. So this is probably like one of those times where someone gives you a detail that you haven't released to the public and you're like, oh, there that is. Combined with the fact that Jessica had been only wearing underwear, investigators began considering the possibility that Jessica and her attacker may have been alone together inside the vehicle shortly before the attack occurred. Investigators also began developing a more detailed theory about how gasoline may have been obtained on the night Jessica Chambers was attacked. According to reports, detectives discovered that around 7:46 p.m., Quinton Tellis called his girlfriend in Louisiana and allegedly told her he was going to walk to his sister's house to borrow a vehicle. That detail caught investigators' attention because they already knew that there was a short route connecting Heron Road, where Jessica's car was burned, to the neighborhood where Tellis' sister lived. And it was along that same route that Jessica's car keys had been found earlier in the investigation. So the road connecting these two is Heron Road. Detectives theorized that after leaving the scene, Tellis may have traveled through that area, obtained access to another vehicle, and then returned to his own home. And called his girlfriend in the meantime. So he does this horrible crime and then he calls his girlfriend, says he's walking to his sister's house to borrow her car. And then another detail surfaced from surveillance footage. Investigators reviewing the video from the gas station Jessica visited earlier that evening realized that the camera angle partially captured the area near Tellis' residence in the distance. And according to investigators, the footage from around 7:50 p.m. appeared to show a vehicle briefly pulling into the driveway near a storage shed on the property. The vehicle reportedly remained there for only a couple of minutes before leaving again. The footage itself was grainy, and investigators could not clearly identify either the driver or the license plate. However, detectives believe the timing was significant because Tellis had previously mentioned having gasoline stored in a shed on the property during earlier interviews, long before he became the primary focus of the investigation. Based on the timeline that they were building, investigators theorized that the stop may have been connected to retrieving a gas can for the attack. One major problem investigators faced was timing. By the time detectives began focusing heavily on Quinton Tellis, many of the physical items they now considered potentially important, including the gasoline can Tellis had previously mentioned, had not been preserved or collected during the earliest stages of the investigation because he was not initially viewed as the primary suspect. So they didn't collect the gas cans that they found in Tellis' shed. Investigators were forced to rely heavily on timelines, cell phone data, and surveillance footage. According to reports, detectives reviewed additional security cameras from the gas station area and believed that one of the cameras captured a vehicle matching the make and model of Tellis' sister's car. Investigators stated the vehicle appeared to have been traveling towards Batesville around 8 o'clock p.m., close to the time frame where Tellis later appeared on surveillance footage purchasing the prepaid cash card. At the same time, detectives were also analyzing the text message history between Tellis and Jessica in an attempt to understand the nature of their relationship. According to investigators, Tellis had repeatedly texted Jessica in the days leading up to her death, asking to meet with her, while Jessica's responses were often described as dismissive or non-committal. Then investigators focused on messages sent around the estimated time of attack. Reports indicate that around 7:42 p.m., Tellis' phone became active again, and he attempted to contact Jessica through calls and text messages. One of the texts reportedly referenced another woman coming over and that he would speak with Jessica the following day. But detectives found several things troubling about Tellis' behavior afterwards. According to investigators, once word had spread that Jessica was seriously injured, Tellis never attempted to check on her or contact her again, which is just a red flag. If you were with this girl hours before her death and you're hearing things in the community that, Jessica might be the one who was set on fire and they're trying to save her at the hospital, you wouldn't try to call or text her and see if it's her unless you knew that it was.
Yeah, or at least reach out to a fellow friend or family member and see what they know what's going on.
Yeah, this is your friend. You're not trying to contact her when you know that she might be the one that was set on fire and they're saving her life at the hospital.
When I hear of some crime happening in any of your guys' town and it's 20, 30 something year old woman, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, where's Kate and Holly?
Yeah, find my friends. Where are you at right now?
Yep.
Yeah. Then, after learning that Jessica died, investigators say that Tellis deleted his call history, his text messages, and Jessica's contact information from his phone entirely.
I love a dumb criminal.
Love him. Gotta love him.
Love him so much. You make it so easy.
Yeah, he's like, oh, I deleted it, so
Yeah.
I'm good. When detectives later questioned him about deleting the information, Tellis allegedly responded that he didn't see a reason to keep the contact information of someone dead in his phone. To investigators, that explanation only deepened their suspicions. What made all of this even more complicated was that investigators had actually known some of those details earlier in the case. According to later reporting, Quinton Tellis had already admitted during an earlier FBI interview that he deleted the messages and contact with Jessica after her death. But at that time, investigators apparently didn't focus heavily on that detail or immediately treat it as suspicious. Why? Great question. That changed once detectives revisited the case in Louisiana. I bet. By then, Tellis was not just sitting in jail for debit card fraud charges. He also became connected to another homicide investigation involving a young girl named Ming Ching, or Mandy, Hasio. I think that's how you say it. If it's not, I'm sorry. Often referred to as Mandy, which that's what we will say. Mandy was a Taiwanese exchange student attending the University of Louisiana, Monroe. On July 29, 2015, she was found brutally stabbed to death inside of her apartment. According to court documents and media reporting, investigators believe that the attack may have been connected to attempts to obtain access to her debit card and financial information. After Mandy's death, her debit card was reportedly used multiple times. Surveillance footage from ATMs allegedly showed Tellis using the card, and investigators later discovered that someone had also contacted Mandy's bank using Tellis's own phone to enter the credit card information and PIN number. It's Tellis. Tellis eventually admitted to using the debit card after Mandy's death. As Mississippi investigators continued re-examining Jessica's murder, the fact that Tellis was now tied to another violent case naturally intensified scrutiny surrounding him and his earlier statements. But the story surrounding Min Ching's, or Mandy's, murder became even stranger once investigators started untangling how they first developed suspects in that case. According to reports, authorities initially received information from a man claiming someone he knew had confessed to Mandy's murder. The witness allegedly provided disturbing details about the crime, including claims that Mandy had been tortured for access to her debit card PIN. At first, the person being accused was not Quinton Tellis. Investigators followed the lead and looked into the individual the witness had identified. But eventually, detectives determined that accusation was false and that the man being blamed could not have committed the crime. When investigators confronted the witness about the inconsistencies, he allegedly admitted he had intentionally tried to frame another man. And then investigators learned another bizarre detail. The witness's name was reportedly Eric Hill. That immediately caught attention, obviously because of the name Eric. We know that Jessica had either reportedly said Eric or Derek. But beyond the coincidence, Hill also reportedly had personal ties to Tellis's family. According to reports, Hill had previously dated Tellis's sister and remained connected to the family circle even after the relationship had ended. As investigators in Louisiana continued working Mandy's case and Mississippi authorities kept examining Jessica's murder, the overlapping relationships, rumors, and connections between the people involved only made both investigations feel more tangled and complicated. Investigators eventually learned that Eric Hill's connection to Quinton Tellis ran even deeper than they realized. According to reports, Tellis later married Hill's cousin, Quinton Jackson, in 2015, reportedly on the very same day Min Ching, or Mandy, was discovered. By that point, investigators understood Hill was closely tied to Tellis socially and through family relationships. After changing his story about Mandy's murder, Hill allegedly told detectives that the non-public details he knew about the crime had actually come from conversations with Tellis. According to reports, Hill claimed the two had exchanged war stories, during which Tellis supposedly described details of Mandy's murder that investigators believed only someone involved in the crime would know. Among these details were specific descriptions of injuries and methods of inflicting pain that had never been released publicly. Still, despite the allegations and growing suspicions, investigators did not have strong forensic evidence directly tying Tellis to Mandy's murder scene. The primary evidence publicly discussed involved the use of Mandy's debit card after her death, ATM surveillance footage, and activity connected to her bank account. Meanwhile, in the Jessica Chambers investigation, forensic analysts had reportedly managed to develop multiple male DNA profiles from the evidence collected on Jessica's car keys. However, as we talked about, the samples remained extremely limited. According to reports, Tellis could not be excluded as a possible contributor to some of the DNA found on the keys. But investigators also could not definitively identify him as the source because the samples were so small and incomplete. When detectives questioned Tellis about why his DNA might be present, he reportedly explained that he had driven Jessica's car before, implying that there's an innocent reason his DNA would have been there. Even without definitive forensic proof, investigators believe that they were beginning to piece together the possible sequence of events. Based on cell phone data, changing statements, surveillance footage, and the nature of Jessica's injuries, detectives theorized that Tellis and Jessica Chambers had been together on the night of the murder, that some kind of confrontation occurred, and that gasoline was used to set Jessica and her vehicle on fire. But despite the growing theory investigators were building, major questions still remain unanswered.
Do they think Jessica had like a gas can in her car, or that he like had this plan and put one in there beforehand? I don't know, subdued her and then went and got the gas cans and then brought him back, or there's like pre-planned bring the gas
Yeah,
cans with.
great question, Kylie. Investigators ultimately developed a theory they believed explained the sequence of events on the night Jessica Chambers was attacked. According to detectives, they believe Quinton Tellis did not realize Jessica was still alive when her car was set on fire. Their theory was that he believed he was destroying evidence and staging the scene, never expecting Jessica to survive long enough to emerge from the woods and speak to first responders. Investigators also viewed Tellis's actions immediately afterwards as suspicious. They believed the text messages he sent Jessica about another woman coming over and speaking with her the next day may have been an attempt to create distance between himself and the crime. Detectives further theorized that his trip to Batesville to purchase a prepaid card was part of an effort to establish a normal-looking timeline and alibi after the attack. Kylie, to your question, I think that he somehow injured Jessica in some way, thinking that she was dead. He went and got the gas can out of the shed, and that's when we see his car or a car that matches the make and model of his car pulling into the shed and then pulling out. He's getting gas cans, and he goes back and sets her car and her on fire. And she's still alive, which is why she is inhaling some of the gasoline. But he thinks she's dead, is what investigators are theorizing.
Gotcha.
Tellis, of course, denies all of these allegations. While he eventually admitted to being with Jessica that evening, he continues to insist that he was not with her the time that she was attacked or killed. But by early 2016, investigators believed that they had enough circumstantial evidence to move forward. And in February 2016, a special grand jury in Panola County indicted Tellis on capital murder connected to Jessica's death. Several months later, in July, Tellis formally pled not guilty. After a series of delays, the case finally moved toward trial in October 2017. When Quinton Tellis' trial finally began in 2017, one of the prosecutor's biggest challenges was proving that all the circumstantial evidence actually placed him at the scene of the murder. Much of the state's case centered around cell phone data and the argument that Tellis repeatedly lied about his movements and interactions with Jessica on the day she died. Prosecutors spent significant time presenting technical testimony about cell phone tower analysis and location tracking systems in an effort to reconstruct where both Jessica and Tellis were through the evening of December 6, 2014. But the testimony quickly became complicated. Jessica and Tellis used different cell phone carriers, meaning that their phones relied on different systems and different networks. According to the defense, Jessica's location data was more precise, while Tellis's location estimates were far less exact and relied more heavily on approximations based on tower usage. That distinction became a major issue during the trial, which I never really thought about, like how different carriers work. They're using different cell phone towers, and I don't know. Interesting. So the prosecution argued the data strongly suggested Tellis and Jessica were together during the critical time surrounding the attack. The defense argued that the technology was too imprecise to conclusively place Tellis at the murder scene. Then there was the other major obstacle for prosecutors, Jessica's alleged dying declaration. Defense attorneys emphasized that multiple witnesses believed Jessica identified someone named Eric or Derek before she died, not Quinton. Meanwhile, prosecutors countered by calling in medical experts who testified that Jessica's burns and airway injuries would have made speech extremely distorted and difficult to interpret or clarify. Some first responders testified that they were certain that they heard a variation of Eric or Derek. Others said the sounds were so unclear that they could not confidently identify a name at all. The defense also highlighted another important point. Surveillance footage showed Tellis in Batesville purchasing the prepaid cash card around the same time prosecutors believed Jessica was being attacked. Prosecutors argued that this trip was part of an effort to create an alibi after the crime, while the defense argued it demonstrated Tellis was somewhere else entirely. By the end of the trial, both sides were often using the exact same piece of evidence to argue completely opposite conclusions. One point, they're saying, okay, well, he's in Batesville to get this prepaid credit card. He's just establishing an alibi. And then the other side is like, oh, the cell phone towers are precisely placing him at this point, at this time, and he couldn't have done it. And then the other side's like, no, they're not exact locations. It just says that he's around this time, at this time. He still could have done it. So it's very confusing, very circumstantial. After closing arguments, the jury deliberated for roughly 8 hours over 2 days. And when they finally returned to the courtroom, the outcome surprised many people following the case. After days of testimony and hours of deliberation, the jury in Quinton Tellis' trial returned to the courtroom with what initially appeared to be a verdict. But almost immediately, confusion erupted. Under Mississippi law, criminal verdicts must be unanimous. Every juror has to agree completely whether the verdict is guilty or not guilty. According to later reporting, some jurors appeared to misunderstand the instructions that they had been given. Several reportedly believed that the jury could not unanimously agree that Tellis was guilty. Then they were automatically required to return a verdict of not guilty. That's not how the system works. If jurors can't anonymously agree either way, the result is generally a hung jury and a mistrial, not an acquittal. So the jurors are just confused. The judge reportedly realized that there was confusion and sent the jury back to continue deliberating. A short time later, they returned again and announced that they had reached a unanimous decision of not guilty. But prosecutors were still concerned something was wrong. When the jury was individually polled in court, it became clear the jurors were still divided and had actually not reached a true unanimous verdict at all. At that point, on October 16, 2017, the judge officially declared a mistrial. The split among jurors reportedly reflected many of the same issues that had dominated the trial itself. Some jurors reported that they could not move past Jessica's alleged statements identifying Eric or Derek. Others questioned whether the cell phone evidence was strong enough to conclusively place Tellis at the scene. The case was unfolding with a community already dealing with deep racial tensions. Jessica Chambers was a young white woman. Tellis was a black man with criminal history. And in a town like Courtland, race became part of a broader conversation surrounding the investigation and the prosecution. Some of the members of the Black community believed investigators had focused too heavily on Tellis because of his background and prior record rather than because of identifying physical evidence tying him to the murder. By the end of the first trial, the case remained deeply divisive, and Jessica's murder was still unsolved. The mistrial did not mean freedom for Quinton Tellis. He was still incarcerated on those unrelated charges, giving prosecutors time to regroup and prepare for a second attempt at convicting him in the murder of Jessica Chambers. And going into the second trial, both sides adjusted their strategies. Prosecutors tried to avoid letting the case become consumed again by the debate over Jessica's alleged declaration. During the first trial, Eric versus Derek, this issue had created significant doubt among jurors, and the state appeared determined to keep the focus on Tellis's changing statements, cell phone evidence, and the timeline that they believed pointed towards his guilt. The defense, however, leaned directly into the dying declaration issue. Defense attorneys brought up their own experts who argued that despite Jessica's horrific injuries, it was still possible for her to clearly pronounce the name Eric or Derek. The defense maintained that investigators had focused too narrowly on Tellis while overlooking the significance of what Jessica may have been trying to say before she died. The prosecution also introduced new witnesses during the second trial, a woman named Sherry Flowers. According to her testimony, she picked up a man walking along Main Street on the night of December 6th, near the same area where Jessica's car keys had previously been discovered. Flowers reportedly said that she initially believed the man might be someone she knew, but later she realized it was a stranger. Investigators theorized the man could have been Tellis. Prosecutors used her testimony to support the timeline they believed showed Tellis traveling towards his sister's neighborhood before later obtaining gasoline. Meanwhile, the defense challenged the integrity of the investigation itself. Attorneys argued detectives pressured or manipulated Tellis during interviews, particularly by overstating how precisely cell phone data could place him at the scene. They're allowed to lie, so. The defense also broadened its focus beyond Tellis alone. Attorneys argued that Jessica's alleged connections to drugs and people involved in criminal activity created other possible suspects or motives investigators may not have fully explored. According to experts, information recovered from Jessica's cell phone eventually contributed to broader anti-gang and narcotic investigations involving numerous arrests in the area. However, none of those individuals were ever charged in Jessica's murder. Once again, after lengthy deliberations, the jury remained divided. This time, jurors reportedly split evenly, 6 voting guilty and 6 voting not guilty. The result, another hung jury and another mistrial, leaving Jessica's case without a final resolution. After the second mistrial, the case against Quinton Tellis remained unresolved. Jurors were once again unable to unanimously agree on whether the state had proven that Quinton murdered Jessica beyond a reasonable doubt. The lack of definitive forensic evidence continued hanging over the case even after years of investigation and 2 lengthy trials. Tellis remained incarcerated on unrelated charges, and attention increasingly shifted towards the Louisiana case involving Mandy. In 2019, a Louisiana grand jury indicted Tellis on second-degree murder charges connected to Mandy's death. Prosecutors reportedly pointed to cell phone and GPS-related evidence that they said placed Tellis near Mandy's apartment around the time she was killed, in addition to the debit card evidence already tying him to activity after her murder. At the same time, questions continued lingering about Eric Hill and the role that he played in the broader investigation. Then, in 2020, the case took a strange turn. Hill reportedly submitted a handwritten affidavit recanting earlier statements that he had made implicating Tellis in Mandy's murder. Hill claimed that he had been pressured by investigators into giving false testimony and stated that Tellis had never confessed anything to him. But even the affidavit itself became controversial. According to reporting, investigators later conducted handwriting analysis and allegedly concluded portions of the document appeared to have been written by both Hill and Tellis. Reports indicated that the 2 men were housed in custody around the same time the affidavit was created, adding another layer of uncertainty to an already complicated situation. November 2022, a Louisiana judge dismissed the murder indictment against Tellis in Mandy's case, ruling that his right to speedy trial had been violated after years of delays. So, a technicality, really. Under Louisiana law, that ruling meant Tellis was to be released. However, before that could happen, Mississippi authorities requested his transfer back to Mississippi custody to address other outstanding sentences and matters keeping him incarcerated. As of now, Tellis remains in Mississippi custody, though the case surrounding both Jessica Chambers and Mandy continue to generate debate, speculation, and unanswered questions years later. And honestly, one of the reasons these cases still fascinate people is because so many pieces remain unsettled. There are still questions about forensic evidence, still questions about cell phone data and witness statements, timelines, and whether investigators fully explored every possible lead. Even now, people continue debating what happened on Heron Road that night in December 2014. Years have passed since Jessica Chambers stumbled out of the woods on Heron Road, burned so badly that first responders could barely recognize her. And somehow, after all of this time, her case still remains unsolved. There may not have been any major public breakthroughs in Jessica's murder investigation since the second mistrial in 2018. Mississippi authorities have never officially cleared Quinton Tellis, but they have also not announced a third trial. So the case remains in this stage of limbo where there's still enormous suspicions but no conviction. But the story does not end there, because in 2024, a Louisiana appeals court reversed the dismissal that allowed prosecutors to move forward. His case out of Louisiana for the murder of Mandy was dismissed because they had violated his right to a speedy trial. But then an appeals court reversed that, and this allowed prosecutors to move forward, again with the Mandy's case. And now, more than a decade after Mandy was killed, Tellis is finally standing trial in Louisiana. What is eerie is how many similarities people continue drawing between the two cases. In both investigations, prosecutors relied heavily on cell phone evidence and circumstantial timelines. In both cases, there were debates over limited forensic evidence, and in both cases, there are still answered questions that never fully went away. Even today, people continue arguing online about whether investigators focus too narrowly on Tellis while overlooking other possibilities. The Eric or Derek statements Jessica allegedly made before she died still hangs over the case like a ghost. And strangely enough, the name Eric keeps resurfacing. Recent reporting surrounding Mandy's case still references Eric Hill, the witness tied to Quinton's family who later recanted statements connected to Mandy's murder. For people who have followed Jessica's case for years, that connection continues fueling speculation and debate about whether every lead was fully explored. At this point, there are only two possibilities. Either investigators correctly identified the man responsible for Jessica's murder but could never fully prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, or the real story of what happened on Heron Road that night still has pieces missing. And if that is true, someone out there knows exactly what happened to Jessica Chambers. But that is where we stand today, and that is the story of Jessica Chambers.
I mean, with both cases, Jessica and Mandy, it's a whole lot of, like you said, a whole lot of circumstantial evidence. But considering everything and both cases, Quentin definitely did it.
I think so too. He lied about his story like 3 or 4 separate times. Although the evidence is circumstantial, there is still a lot of evidence that he was with her that night, and he was with her then at the time she was killed. I think that there's something to do with this Hill guy. I don't know if Jessica actually even knew him, but I think that these people are obviously like not good people. Maybe there's a connection with him, maybe there's not. This Hill guy is obviously, he's done something. Just strange.
Dare I say it's one of your best stories?
Thank you. Wow, thanks. I really liked this one. It was very interesting. There's a really great documentary about it. I'm pretty sure it's Investigate Discovery is where I saw it. This was a very, very interesting one. And very sad too. I left out a lot of details that were like heart-wrenching because they were just honestly too much. Thanks guys for sticking through it. Hopefully we'll see resolution in this case in the next few years or, our lifetimes, hopefully. Okay guys, we are skipping overtime because this was a long one. We're going to give you some time back like they say in corporate. And we will catch you next week with another case. Please like, hit subscribe, share this with your friends, all the things, our usual please. We love you guys and we will see you next week with another thrilling case. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.